I don't want to give you the wrong idea that the special parts never break. Sometimes they do. But what I was getting at is, like, for example, this bearing right here, I've had one of those I had to replace in all the time I've been in this business since 1998. And we got the first rig in 1999, and it was an old bearing then because that was a 1969 rig. And actually the bearing didn't fail. It was the ears on the end of it wore out from all the back and forth with the arm that pushes on it, and then I couldn't put grease in it anymore. So anyway, I had another rig, so that we weren't using because it had an engine problem on the carrier, and I just pulled one off of that one and put it on the other rig. But sometimes I've had the bearing and the digging clutch fail once on the other rig, never on this rig. We've only been using this one really a lot for the last 3 years, I guess. The main things that fail that are special parts, there's 4 keys inside this transmission, and sometimes those will break. They're a step key, so they're kind of special, but you could make some without too much trouble. You can take some regular key stock and take it to a machine shop and have them machine the outer section down narrower than the top. Or maybe there's step keys that are already the right size. I don't know. The ones that I bought for it were the ones that were made special for it, and I haven't had to change any since since all the places that sell parts for these things went out of business. So the step keys in there have failed. I've had to replace, not on this rig, but on another rig, both shafts. Well, wait a second. No, I replaced the output shaft twice. I've never replaced the input shaft. I think I had to replace the output shaft twice. And that was, I guess, about 17 years we used that rig. I had to replace it 2 times during that period of time. I've had to replace the sprocket on the back side of that bottom, no, not the bottom. Oh, maybe I did replace the bottom sprocket. I can't remember. That's weird that I had to replace that one if that's it. Maybe it was the digging sprocket. That's probably what I had to change. On the one that runs on that shaft right there. But that's, I don't remember if that was a special one or not. But sprockets can be had from, a place like Martin Sprocket. Those are pretty normal. Chains, they're all normal. Those are the wear parts. Like chains wear out and break. But you can spend a lot of money on chain, or you can spend a little bit of money depending on where you get it from and if you decide you have to have American chain or not. I hadn't found that it makes a lot of difference in terms of which chain you use for how long it lasts. I've had a few of the pillow blocks wear out and I had to change those. They're pretty expensive, they'd be between maybe $300 and $900 depending on which one it is. But the normal bearing house will have that. The spools don't wear out, the drums don't wear out. They're metal, they're simple, the friction material wears out, like on the brakes. I've had to have one of the brakes relined once on the, well, maybe I replaced them twice on the inner Kelly brake band. But that's a normal industrial part. You can have that done. I can't remember, it was some industrial brake place in Atlanta that I had to take the band that I already had and I put a new liner on it. And now I did buy a replacement one of these bands before rather than having it relined. At that time it was cheaper to do that, I think, than to have it relined. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, the most expensive thing that I've had to change a lot is the ring and pinion set in that gearbox. Those, when you could get them, were about $7,500 for the set. And the bolts that hold that, sometimes those would fail too. And those bolts were about $35 each. Now I've got a box full of those bolts, more than you'll probably ever need. But the ring and pinion set, that is the main thing that concerned me, that made me decide to buy these other rigs. Because that, if you had to have that made, you might spend $20,000 on those 2 pieces, and you might have to wait for 2 months to get it made. That is the biggest thing on the rig that is special, that costs a lot of money. And so it's better to buy an extra rig the way that you can get them these days for a low price than it is to buy a ring and pinion set. And that's why we, you know, I only can run one rig at a time, and I think we have 1, 2, 3. We've got 5 rigs and 1 extra rotary pot, and all of them have a good ring and pinion set in it right now. So I've got a lot of time that I could get out of those without having to have anything special made. I'll just say that since we got the since we made the reamer tool, it has dramatically improved how long that part lasts. I mean, dramatically. And I'll make another video about the reamer tool later, but that ring and pinion set was definitely the most expensive thing that was would break and cost a lot of money to fix. The other stuff like the belts, if you have to replace the belts in the middle of this thing, I had to do that once in the time that we've had that other rig for 17 years or however long it was we were running it, and it was a real pain. And on another rig, I had to replace the power shaft, the main one that comes through there. It broke on the input side. That was a 1963 rig, I think, and I changed that shaft, and that was a real pain because you got to take a lot of stuff out. You got to take the hoist out. You got to have the rig standing up, of course, first and put in a secure place, a secure way, or if you had a crane, you could take the boom off, I guess. But we stood it up to do the job, and you got to take the hoist out, and you got to take the belts off of the far side so you can move the power shaft up. And of course, everything's heavy. You got to take the hydraulic pump off, and you got to take the clutches off at least one side of the other 2 shafts so you can get the belts around. Basically, you got to take the whole guts of the rig apart to change those belts. That's a terrible job. It takes a few days to do that, but it's the parts aren't very expensive. It's just a lot of trouble to get in there. But thankfully, those don't hardly wear out. They last a long time, so that's not a problem. Really, the thing that you got to do the most is just, you know, like normal maintenance of changing oil in the rig, in the engine, greasing everything regularly. The life is in your grease. If you grease it a lot, you won't have to do nearly as much repairs. But the actual things you have to change a lot is, I don't know which one is you have to change more, is the chains on the digging chains. This one, the 80 double on the input side, I don't know. When we used to run augers all the time and didn't have the reamer tool, I had to change the auger. I mean, I had to change everything at least twice as often, maybe 3 times as often. The chains would wear out faster. The keys in the transmission would break faster. The ring and pinion set would break faster. The output shaft, the output chain would break faster. But since we made those reamer tools, that stuff just lasts really good compared to before. But the chains on the digging part, definitely they get the most wear of any of the chains. So the chains need to be replaced sometimes. Probably more often than the chains is the cables will wear out. And the last few times I've had to change the cables, I think I've had to do it more often because we ended up buying some that were at an auction, and that they were strong enough. They're the cables that they call for is a 6x36 with an inner wire rope core. So there's, if you look at the end of the cable, I don't know if I can bend this thing around where you can see it, or if it's there's 6 strands at the end, and there's one in the middle that's like, they're all twisted, and the ones that have 36 little wires per each of those 6 outer bundles that are twisted is pretty flexible, and they can tolerate a lot of bending back and forth without wearing out the cable too much. These are a 6x19, I think, and they don't tolerate that as good, and so they wear out faster and break sooner. But because I had some, and because I'm a little bit of a cheapskate, I used it instead of just letting that stuff rot and buying new cable. The inner Kelly hoist, it has to have its cable changed occasionally too. And I will say that The biggest thing that will save you on that inner hoist is making sure that you don't let it get tangled up, because it gets in a lot of tension, and if it's laying on top of itself and it's all in a bird nest, it's going to wear out way faster than if you keep it on the drum tight all the time and are careful about that. I think what else is the wear issue on these things? I don't know, it seems like it's always something with the carrier more than it is with the rig. Tires are one of the big things. It seems like, I don't know if we got tires that are rated for too much weight and they get hot faster and blow up easier. I don't know, but it seems like tires is the biggest problem. And I don't know, it seems like it's always just some weird thing. Like, you can see that air filter down there is all burned up underneath the air conditioner, because I had a hole develop in the muffler and it blew out hot air and melted that, and it didn't really matter, so I left it. So we had a muffler that was bad, and had, you know, various electrical problems with, you know, lights and things like that, and mirrors getting knocked off and stuff like that. But as far as the actual digging part, it's pretty reliable. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, so sometimes things do. And hydraulic hoses, that's the other thing. Seems like hydraulic hoses give trouble sometimes. And one of the things we did, because the outrigger jacks on this old rig, they don't have the pilot operated check valve like is built into a lot of the jacks on cranes and stuff. And so you can see we put a ball valve there. And so the idea of that is because normally, you know, when you don't have a pilot operated check valve on your outrigger jack, then the jack cylinder, or piston rather, and rod is being held out by the oil that is being held in by the valves up here. And so you've got long hoses that run out of this, go down through the belly of the rig. There's some that go toward the back outriggers and go inside the legs that slide out and go to the end. And you know, most of that path you can't see it, so you don't know if you have a place that's getting an abrasion from rubbing around, vibrating while you're driving down the road, or if it's gotten pinched some way because you didn't clean off your outrigger good enough and it got a bunch of dirt in there and that made it act funny and pinched a hose or something. You can't see any of that stuff, my point. Anyway, but if you put a valve right by the jack, then even if you had a failure in a hose somewhere, as long as that valve's closed, then your jack's going to be all right. So what we normally do is we'll get the rig set up level before we stand the boom up, and then we'll close those valves. And that way, none of the hoses that are up here leading to these valves for the actual jacks, or at least the ones on the back. I probably ought to put a valve on the front jacks. I just haven't done it yet on this rig. But anyway, at least the back ones that give you the most stability, those are not relying on the hose's integrity. But sometimes the hose will bust. That's another thing that can happen. And of course, there's a lot of them. So anyway, those are some of the issues that are kind of common. But it is the case that most of the pieces that are special are long lasting, and they're not really wear parts, you know. A lot of the things that wear are the sprockets and the chains and the cables and that kind of stuff, and those are pretty normal. It's the gears that are the expensive things that it would be hard to get, and so that's why we wanted to have plenty of spares on the other rigs that have bad engines and whatever in them, and so that's the value in that stuff. But I think I'm going to stop talking about that and make another video in a minute about how to run it.